say that I'm gon' ride, man, I'm gon' ride. If I say that we gon' slide, man, we gon' slide. Your day one, I'ma be right by your side. To my body in the ground, on my soul up in the sky.
What's going on, everybody? This is the second episode of the Elevate podcast. I'm your host, Arobaso Bede. I got my co-host with me. Abdi, you want to say what's up?
Hi, everyone. Abdi Rahman Abdi here.
Bet. And we have a special guest in the building. Well, technically not in the building. We're actually virtual, so I guess virtual room. Kaanon. Kaanon, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Awesome. So before we actually jump into it, we'll actually read a little bit of a bio, give people a little bit of a sense of who you are, what you're doing, and then we'll jump straight into it. So Kaanon MacFalane is an engineering manager at Pinterest for the home and close-up product team, which develops the user interfaces of the discovery services of the app. Before that, he worked in many roles as a senior software engineer. At Pinterest, he spent time in ads, making it easy for small businesses and making reporting easy for advertisers. At eHarmony, he worked on varied projects from server-side architecture, growth, experimentation, even mommy blogs. A web engineer at heart, he spends his time building both engineers and software. He also reads a lot, from behavioral economics to graphic novels. He graduated from the University of California, Riverside, and lives in the Bay Area with his wife, also a UCR grad, and 3 children. Kaanon is a father, a constant learner, an engineer, and a mentor. Dope. Did I miss anything, Kaanon?
Oh, that sounded pretty good.
Dope. All right, well, let's just jump straight into it. So, we know that you've done a little bit of freelance work post-graduation. You want to tell us a little bit about what that experience was like? And also, where do you see the freelance ecosystem going post-COVID? We understand that freelance was pretty big before COVID, but what do you think it's going to be like, post-COVID era?
Oh, you're going to need to remind me the second half of that question. My memory isn't what it used to be. So I earlier on in my career, I would work freelance alongside my my main work and my kind of normal job, and I did so for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons was that when I did freelance work, I was kind of building something on my own, and that meant that I got to explore technologies that I didn't really have the opportunity to explore at work. And so at work, we already had a database. We weren't making a new database from scratch very often. So as I was freelancing or doing my own thing, I got a chance to kind of design a database from scratch. Or if there was a new technology, then I could kind of explore that. But the other reason that I did freelance was to make money, and so essentially to augment my my income. And so the way that it would work is someone would find out that I know how to code, say, "Oh, can you do something for me on the side?" And I would say maybe, and then we chat back and forth, and eventually I would do a few projects. So I did a few projects for a handful of friends, and I hated it. I hated it so much because clients kind of very often didn't know what they wanted. And so they would ask for something and I would build it and they say, "Oh, that's not what I meant." I'm like, "Well, why didn't you clearly ask me?" And so more than once I would essentially kind of like build something and then fire that client because it wasn't worth my time anymore. My happiest times freelancing were when I worked like alongside a kind of full established freelancing company. And then they were just giving me tasks to do, like, "Hey, make the autocomplete work." Okay, cool. Make it so that the forgot password works. Okay, cool. And then I would go build things, but I didn't have to deal with the client conversations. So that's my experience in freelancing.
Awesome. And real quick, was that just completely web development?
It was primarily web development. And when I say web development, I kind of mean, I guess today I would call it full stack. And so to give an example, I worked on a travel company for someone, right? And so that involved kind of deciding the server architecture, like how are we going to build this, how are we going to send the messages. There was a form to contact the workers at this travel company. And so I built that form, decided what would be in the form, decided how the page would look. So it was kind of like the whole thing.
Oh, and for those of you guys listening, you quickly want to actually go over what a full stack developer is, just real quick, because I think that's I don't know if that's a new term, but it is definitely a term that maybe someone recently coming into UCR might not be familiar with.
All right, so I'll probably give a little history. So I started my career as a programmer. I graduated 05, CS degree. I was a programmer. And then eventually I was like, I'm not a programmer. It's too simple. I'm a developer. So I started calling myself a developer. And eventually we got around to calling ourselves software engineers, even though, I've taken real engineering classes and this ain't no engineering, I'll tell you that. And so, but during this time, when I was a programmer, developer, software engineer, it was just like, here's the work. And you just figured out what the work to do was. However, over time, and the bigger the company, you become more specialized. So, when I'm doing work all around the technical stack, that's what you would call full stack. But what I have, for instance, on the team that I manage now, is I have front end web developers who develop the web code, usually a lot of JavaScript. I have server side backend people who, for us, work with Python or Java. I have front end mobile engineers who are working to build iOS apps and mobile apps. And so now it's become more specialized. And so an engineer who is essentially has multiple specialties, particularly something in the front end, something that a human will see, and something in the back end where it's just the data talking to other services, that would be a full stack engineer.
Yeah, I think it's just so fascinating. When people come into college and want to major in computer science and become a software engineer, the first thing that they think of is just software engineering, but there's multiple facets of software engineering. There's web development, iOS, Android. There's DevOps. There's so much to be learned and to dive into. And there's new fields too, like maybe data science or machine learning and artificial intelligence. So,
there's quite a few different fields for people to go into now. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So you did mention that you managed engineers at your current company, Pinterest.
Yep.
You want to talk about what is exactly an engineering manager's role, and how does that differ from, let's say, a senior software engineer, junior software engineer, or even just an entry level new grad engineer? If that's
well, first I get to hire and fire people. I think an engineering manager is really the people manager of it all. And what that means is for my engineers, I have like a few roles. One is to encourage my engineers and make sure that they have what they need. Make sure that they have what they need from like an emotional standpoint, like, are you doing okay? But also make sure that they have what they need and they understand the specifics of what we're trying to build. They understand the specifics of why we're trying to build that, like what's the business need or what's perhaps the developer need if they're building something that makes things easier for other engineers. And it's also driving results. So a big part of my job is actually the kind of project management of saying like, okay, what are the things we need to do? Who's going to do it? Assigning out tasks, following up with people, making sure that's going well. And then the last part, which I don't think I really learned until I became an engineering manager, was that I'm a partner in each engineer's growth, right? And so each engineer who works for me is responsible for their own growth, right? How they grow as an engineer, but I can help. And part of how I help is having conversations with them and say, I had an engineer and he had spent most of his career, he came to us as a returning intern. He had spent most of his career writing front-end code, writing the web code. But he knew that there were other skills out there he wanted to learn back-end. And so because we had clear lines of communication, I was able to look at our roadmap, look at the things that we had coming up that we were going to be needing to do as a team. And when the time came to assign that work, I made sure he was assigned to that work so that he could start to grow in that new skill set. And so the way that this differs from a senior software engineer is a senior software engineer is responsible for like the execution of the task, but they're not responsible for like other people's execution of the task, right? And so they might mentor, they might give hints and they might help someone. They might even do the driving the execution, like I mentioned. But the difference is they're not responsible for it. So if my team fails, I'm responsible for that. But if the team fails, no one would hold the senior software engineer accountable for that.
Yeah, so it's sort of like a like combination of different skill sets that you kind of need to be an engineering manager. It's not just 95% coding and then the rest you might be in like a couple meetings. It's much more dynamic than what most people would.
It's so much different than I thought, right? So when I was a engineer, I spent basically 100% of my time coding, maybe 2% meetings, right? 98% coding, 2% meetings. When I moved to senior engineer, it was like 90% coding and 10% meetings. I moved to tech lead, which is it's just like a slightly more senior, or it's not necessarily more senior in position, but like it's a slightly different role. And so I added about 10% one-on-one. So 70% coding, 20% meetings, 10% one-on-ones. So when it came time to become a manager, I thought, okay, I'll be coding for like maybe a quarter of the time. And I'll be in meetings for 50% of the time. And the other 25% is one-on-ones with people. But now I can't even mess around with the percentages because it's like, 4% coding, 9% therapy, 20% coaching and persuading. I'm storytelling and project managing. I'm product managing. I got to deal with a little bit with the marketing so people know what my team is doing. I have to gather information so that we can make the right decisions. Even traveling sometimes to go meet with customers. I'm making slide decks to talk to higher ups. I'm triaging bugs to make sure that we have high quality. I'm involved in the user research to kind of understand how people are using the product that we're building so that we can make it even better. I'm interacting with the designers that will that will design how the product looks and working with them, doing data analysis, competitive analysis, emails, retros, delegating, recruiting, hiring, firing, following up, managing. It's a lot more varied than I initially expected when I first took the job.
Yeah. And is that side of the career more enjoyable for you than just hard coding and doing more technical work?
It is now. It wasn't for a very, very, very long time. For a very long time, I was content and happy as my output being primarily how much code I was writing or how high quality the code was or how complex it was. And that was the thing that made me happy. And now I think I've grown more wise, and now I find a lot of value in like what the team is outputting and how I can help grow people and how I get to have my hands in all of these different things. But if I drop some code in, no one's gonna bat an eye. And so I still get to do it if I'd like to, and so that's something that's fun.
And it seems like it came with a lot more freedom compared to what you previously had. I mean, I know a lot of people, in software industry and in a lot of industries, people deal with burnout. And you said at the beginning that at the beginning you didn't really like it. Now that you're looking back, would you have preferred to start where you started, or do you think it would have been better for you to start from more of a product style consulting area and then heading into tech lead, or are you happy with the path you took to where you are?
I don't think I would have been effective if I had just started there. I don't think I had acquired the life experiences to do my job effectively. I don't think I could have learned to encourage people until, frankly, I was discouraged by managers, right? Or I don't think I would have learned how to effectively push others towards driving execution until I learned how to drive execution myself. So I don't think that it could have gone differently. Full disclosure, in my first job, I'll tell a story about my first job. So my first job out of college, second job out of college. That's a funny story. But so I'm at the first kind of real job, and I'm there. I'm pretty happy. I'm enjoying the work that I'm doing. But I start to suspect that, hey, I think I can get paid more, right? And so I go out and I interview for other places, and I got two job offers that were like a good like a significant percentage more than what I was making. And so I go back and I say, hey, I don't really want to quit, but these people are going to pay me this. So like, why don't you just match or beat that? And, and I'll stay around. And so they did. and say, okay, we'll give you the money, but you're manager now. And I'm just like, but I'm you know, this is like probably year 2 of my career, and so didn't have a whole lot of experience there. And so during that time, that was a time when like most of my time was still 70% coding and kind of deciding what the other engineers would do, and hiring and firing was much less frequent. But then I compare that to when I became a manager again later in my career, and all of the wisdom that I had gained made me a much more effective manager than that first go around.
Okay, I mean you answered my question. That is hopefully clears it up for a lot of people struggling to find out what they want. So starting as a software engineer is not the end all be all. You're stuck in that stage. You can definitely get out of it, move into other careers. All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. To say a little bit more about that, there's a book. It's called Range. It's by oh boy, what's that guy's name?
We'll put it in the show notes as well. So
Perfect. It's by David Epstein. It's about why generalists triumph in a specialized world. And one of the things that I realized looking back on my career was that I had successfully developed range. I didn't do it on purpose, but after reading this book, I was like, oh, this is exactly what I did. So I mentioned that I started off my career and I was a programmer, right? And so as a programmer at this first job is this small hosting company out in Orange County, and web hosting. Does anyone know what web hosting is? It's changed so much over the years.
You can go ahead and explain it to.
Yeah.
Sure. So web hosting is basically where the web lives, where the internet lives. And so you've got some idea. You want to sell some cups, and you want a cup website. And so one of the things that you could do is you go find some place to put it. And now most people would just sign up with Shopify or perhaps host with AWS. But before those things existed, there were individual smaller hosting companies, and that's where I would work. And so the idea was someone would sign up, pay us, $100 a year, load up their website on there, and then people around the internet could like go to their domain and actually hit their website. It's basically rent. You're renting the computer somewhere, and then people can access it. So I'm working at this company, and I'm a programmer, and so the first thing they tell me to do is to build this dedicated server system. And I didn't know what a dedicated server was, but they gave me the specs, and so I built it. And that involved like actually designing new database tables, determining how we would add to the database tables. And then I built a UI for the customer support staff to like go in and create new ones. And it was essentially like an inventory system. And so I learned a lot of back-end coding there. And then I moved over to rebuilding our sign-up page for new customers to sign up. And I needed to develop a new set of skills. And so that was a lot more JavaScript that I needed to develop. And so there was some back-end in the first part, and then there was some front-end in this part. And then eventually, throughout my career, I learned, I started doing more PHP, which was like a different language that I hadn't been working on before. And then I did some Ruby, which was another popular language, and Ruby on Rails. And then I even did things like I think the most technically complex thing that I did was I built the Node.js architecture for eHarmony, and so designing how we would build our servers, how we would deploy code on there, how the Node.js process would run, and how it would restart, and designing all of that. And through all of this varied experience, when I look back, I was like, well, what was the thing that I was most happy about? And it was always like stupid little animations that I built. Like you would click on something and it would like click in and then go out, right? And it was kind of funny when I sort of realized this about myself, that I had developed range in building all sorts of different things, and so I was effective at back end code. I was capable at architecture. I was capable at front end code. But like I learned the type of work that most excited me. And it's beautiful because in your career, when you're coming out of college, you just don't know any of that. You hardly know these jobs exist. And so one of the things that people can do is kind of like be open to the new experiences, because what I found after, 10 plus years was like, oh, this is the type of work that I'd like to do the most. And I started to actually choose roles and choose projects that would allow me to do that sort of thing. But I wouldn't have known unless I had all those years of trying out the different things to do. And so it's kind of exciting because one of the fun parts of software engineering is that you get to explore different businesses and different types of technology. And there's enough jobs and enough companies that you can then start to pivot towards the things you like the most.
Yeah, it seems like you have you have had like a phenomenal like journey in terms of a career path. And for those of you listening, like not keying on just one piece of technology or one language is really big, because it's not about knowing only Python. It's not only knowing, um, Android development. Like it's a wide range, like you said, of skills and skill sets. So um, with that being said, I actually wanted to kind of jump back to what we were talking about before, where your time at Pinterest, and there was actually two things I want to hit on. One, and all disclosure, working at Pinterest, like the environment and the workflow and the culture, and if you just want to talk about that. And the second question was, Pinterest was formerly a private company, now being a public company. Was there any change in the uh, again, full disclosure, was there any change in like the I guess the culture, the environment, pre IPO and then post IPO?
Yeah, so I would say the culture at Pinterest is very collaborative. Even we had a company value that we followed for a long time called knit, like knitting together, because we would knit together the different engineering, product design, marketing type of disciplines. And so that's definitely one of the things that I like, is that decisions are typically made in a way where people get a chance to speak up or and hear their voice, and I think it's something that's allowed us to make wise decisions. I also like that the company has, I think, two attributes that I like quite a bit. One is I think we have a it could be better, of course, but a good number of female engineers, which is not always around. And I remember when I was interviewing for the company, I was interviewed by like three female engineers at Pinterest, and all five of my other on sites was like one. So I was like, "Oh, Pinterest is doing something right here." And also that because of that, and because of the nature of the company, right? It's a product that helps bring inspiration to people in the world. We have a lot of creative people, and so I just recently found out that one of my product managers is like an incredible artist, right? Or one of the engineers on my team is actually like an incredible cook and like has like taken classes at cooking. And one of my tech leads, she loves to play golf, that kind of thing. Now, in relation to how Pinterest has moved from being a private company to a public company, the changes have not been dramatic. They've been very subtle changes. And so things like we used to have a lot more transparency in terms of how much money was being made. And that sort of thing, because of like the public pressures of being in a public market, okay, that information is no longer widely available, right? Or if I think about some things kind of being changing in HR or whatever, right? Like I used to bring people to the office and we just walk around the office, and now we don't just let people walk around the office anymore. And so people had to sign in even back then. But I would say it's kind of subtle things like that. But the true DNA of how we want to put our customer, our pinners first, has never changed, and that's one of the reasons I'm still here.
It's awesome. Yeah. The only reason I brought that up was, Pinterest is located in the heart of San Francisco. San Francisco is located in the Bay Area. Bay Area contains Silicon Valley. So
Yeah,
the environment, around Silicon Valley is just, it's its own culture in itself. And I kind of wanted to allude to this, that if actually you want to speak on what is the environment like being in basically the heart of the tech capital of not just the country but the world. And um yeah.
that I have a lot to say about.
Yeah.
So after UCR, I worked in Orange County and LA County. And I had a good career. I was well paid. I enjoyed the companies I worked at. I was working on very interesting things. Um, but like the only other engineers I knew were people who I went to UCR with, and people who were like I was like currently working with or used to work with. Like that was my tech network, right? And then when it came to compensation, I was paid a generous salary, and depending on the company, I was paid a bonus. And these are good, very good things. I will not be one to say that software engineers are underpaid. However, here's what happened. This is the story I like to tell. So me and my team were sitting there at eHarmony one day, and the news comes out that Facebook acquired Instagram for $1 billion. And so I was like, $1 billion? Like, that's a lot. $1 billion? And how many people work there? And I don't know the number, but it was a low number. It was like 13 or 8 or just some very sub 20 number. It was a tiny group of people. And I was like, I don't know how any of this works, but I bet those people got real paid.
Yeah.
And so eventually, when the time came for me to say, okay, it's time to go looking for other companies, I like to joke that first I was like, I'm going to approach this like my free agency, like Kevin Durant or LeBron James, and just like take as many calls as I can. But also like legit, like going unicorn hunting. If you don't know, a unicorn is a private company that's valued at more than $1 billion. So I went unicorn hunting, and I found one, and that's Pinterest, and it worked out. We IPO'd. But related to the question of the what is different, it essentially I made the move from Los Angeles with my wife and kids up to the Bay Area. I work in San Francisco. I live in the East Bay outside Oakland, and I'm wearing this Dev Color shirt because I joined an organization not unlike NSBE. That is it's a group of Black software engineers, and so it was really crazy to me because I was walking home one day. I was walking to the BART, which is the public transportation up here, and like walking the other way, I saw another Black software engineer. Like we were going in opposite directions, and I just thought to myself that like I have never in my life before, like outside of work, seen a Black software engineer. Right? Like I had worked with a handful of Black software engineers. At my jobs, I think luckier than many, but I had never just like seen one out and about. That let alone that I knew, and we were just going in opposite directions. And I remember in maybe the first 6 months at Pinterest, we had an engineer from Uber come visit us, and he was telling us about some technology, some process that they were using at Uber. And I was just like, wait, people just like know each other and talk? Like, what's going on? Or we were doing some work with the technology called React. And one of my colleagues at Pinterest was just like in open conversation with the people who were building React at Facebook. And I was just like what is going on? And so I essentially I thought that the LA area was like a pretty good tech sector, right? We're not too bad. But when I came here and kind of recognized the ubiquity of it, how people know each other at so many different companies, and now I know people at different companies. It's very different. Where like companies even, or the engineers at least at the companies, like even collaborate on different technologies and they talk to each other, and it was just a big difference. I'll put it another way. It was the street that Pinterest is, our offices are on in San Francisco. On that street is Airbnb. And then if you go down the other direction is Dropbox. Well, they might have moved by now, but for a long time it was Dropbox. And then next to that was this company called Cruise, which is a self-driving car company. And then if you walk up the street is Atlassian, which is this huge project management software company. Or my buddy invited me to have lunch at the Uber kind of cafeteria because a lot of these places have free food all the time, including Pinterest. And so I take a lift to the Uber offices. How funny. Why didn't I take an Uber? And so I take a lift to the Uber office, and I get there, and I try to sign in, and he's at the other Uber office. I went to the wrong Uber office on the same street in San Francisco. And he was actually a previous, I think he was president right after me at UCR. And I have another friend from UCR who's like working at Apple, and he's like, I can't tell you about the new phones. And and this is like the sort of thing where I'm now starting to have a network of people throughout these companies. I know the person who manages the React Native team over I have 3 manager friends at Facebook. I know people who are working at like basically any tech company, maybe not any tech company, but a lot of the major tech companies, like I have met and spoken to people who are working there in significant ways. And this is just something that a lot of it is because of the Dev Color organization, but it's also the proximity that we have here where people are just kind of like local to each other and see each other. I like to think that LA has the entertainment industry and New York has like the finance industry. Well, the Bay Area, we definitely have the tech industry in such a way that like it is everyone kind of knows other people who are in the tech industry.
Yeah, I think this gentleman named Peter Thiel. I think a lot of people are familiar with him. CEO Palantir. He put it this way: he said Silicon Valley is essentially the major league version of the technology sector. You know, you can go to the D League or G League out in some other city, but essentially, when you get to the Bay Area, the amount of talent and connection and just concentration is just vast. So
Yeah, it's so much so that like I have an opinion on Peter Thiel. I know who Peter Thiel is, and I have an opinion about him. And many other most people that I would talk to would have an opinion about Peter Thiel, or we have different opinion. Like we understand who the CEOs or the various people are at these different companies. And I was at eHarmony for a long time. You think I had any opinion on anybody at Match? No one. No, didn't care. Could care less. Like I hope our business did better than them, but not in such a way that there was any sort of like real connection. Versus, I know people who've like worked at Lyft and gone to Uber, or like I have friends who like I just know people going about and having different opinions, and it's just a very very different thing. And to be clear, like one part of why I came up here was because I wanted to see if I could cut it, and I could. I can cut it. But it's actually something that I would kind of recommend. I don't know how remote work is going to change things. I don't know how the quarantine is going to change things, but all in all, for me, moving to the Bay Area has been a very, very good thing from both a kind of knowledge and wisdom gaining experience and network gaining experiences, as well as, frankly, from like a monetary stage. Because I talked about how earlier in my career I was paid with a healthy salary and a bonus. But a lot of the companies here also have. Oh, am I still there? Okay, I hope so. A lot of the
Yeah,
companies up here
he should be
also
here.
have compensation that includes equity and stock. And so what that means is that you get some amount of company stock, and hopefully you're working at a company that will do well over time, and that stock, the value of it will increase. And so for a lot of people, that in software engineering at least, that might be the exact number of their salary, right? And so it might effectively double their salary or even more. And that was the sort of thing where I just had no inclination of that, and it's true. Like people are making a lot more because of that extra component.
yeah, like growing up in the Bay Area, I never really realized. Like I heard of all these tech companies. I had seen them. I've been to campuses as a kid growing up, and I always thought like this can't be the center of everything. Like it's got to be New York. It's got to be London. Like there's just no
Yeah.
way like anybody would want to move to San Jose or San Francisco or anything. And then getting older, and then just seeing like the amount of talent um, and just a phenomenal people in one concentrated area is just it's insane. I mean, it's literally the mecca of if you want to start something and change the world. Come to Silicon Valley. That being said, oh no, go ahead, Abdi.
Speaking about Silicon Valley, during the COVID pandemic and everything, I noticed there's a lot of political things. I don't know if I don't know if you mind if we get into this real quick, but I know you live there, so this
Let's get
affects you more
real.
than anyone. Um, do you believe that the moving away from California taxes thing is ever going to happen here? I know that's a very controversial point. A lot of people talk about tech companies trying to get out and stuff. We saw it with Tesla and I think it was Oracle. But do you think other big companies are going to follow? Do you think they're truly going to go down to Texas and try to save a few of their dollars and head down there?
Maybe. So I have complicated thoughts on this, and I'd like to reiterate that these are Kaanon's thoughts. These are not the thoughts of Pinterest.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Sure. So first, I want to talk about population. What I have seen is not people fleeing the Bay Area, like humans, right? Like individuals, families. I've not seen them fleeing the Bay Area. I've only seen them fleeing San Francisco. So to be clear, like I have, 10 employees, like 4 of them have moved. And it's either within San Francisco or they move to some city that's slightly further away. Maybe they get a backyard for their kids now. They don't, because the commute isn't important. And so I think the population departure from the Bay Area is overblown, or rather, it's more nuanced, right? It's like, yes, people are leaving one of the most expensive cities in the world, but they're not necessarily leaving the entire Bay Area. They're just moving to somewhere in the Bay Area where they don't have to pay quite as much for rent or mortgage. Okay. Now, from a company perspective, I think that it's mixed. On a personal note, I don't care that Tesla and Oracle are moving to Texas because no one I know wants to work at those places. Those places are not great places to work, and so I kind of don't care. They're like very big names. They're very well known. Tesla's market cap is enormous, but
Nobody wants to work.
Nobody
there.
wants to work.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to work at those places.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't heard any good stories of people I've known now with my extended network who are just like, I love Tesla, the company that I work at, and I love Oracle, the company. I just haven't heard those. So I kind of like good riddance to those type of companies. Or like if HP leaves, who gives a crap? But I will say that there's so many facets to this. It's nuanced. And so part of it is for the companies themselves to figure out ways to pay lower in taxes. Although there's a whole bunch of those companies that aren't paying their fair share of taxes anyway. And so there's that part. There's also the part of the employees who might want to pay less taxes. Of course, part of the benefits of California are like there's also the weather and there's the water and there's the mountains and there's nature and there's good restaurants and there's other things that are not simply related to it. And so some people would love to move to Texas or Idaho or some other place, and some people are like, well, I still like actually living here. And so there's that. And then there's the facet of literal saving money on employment. And so for a company in the Bay Area, we essentially, the companies here pay the most money, right? Seattle is close. LA is a little bit further behind, along with Chicago and New York. And so you can pay someone in Texas much, 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 much less money because in Texas things cost less, and the person doesn't need as much money to live their life. And so there is that, which is like from a business perspective is like a reasonable thing for companies to do. I think it's far too early for me to like really guess where these companies are going. I certainly don't know where my company is going. But then there's another facet, which is right now a lot of the wealth generation is happening here in the Silicon Valley. That's why I came here. Like I didn't have access to it until I was willing to move, right? Until I was willing to say bye to my family and just say, come up here and, try to live the dream. But if we start opening hiring centers in other locations where other types of people are, this could be a very good thing, right? Like if Google was to open an engineering hub in Atlanta, which they might have. I'm not super familiar with Google's campuses. Well, surprise, surprise, a lot of Black people live in Atlanta, and and a lot of them will get jobs at Google, right? Or I know I think some places have opened up in Detroit and things like that. And so one of the possible avenues of benefit of having more distributed workforces geographically is that if this has a chance to change the population distribution at these companies, which are overwhelmingly white and Asian, um, in ways that are disproportionate. And so, because they're qualified people who just don't want to move, right? Um, and so, I think it's a nuanced stance, and that's kind of my point of view on it. So, I think people fleeing the Bay Area is a bit overblown, but I think there's some parts to it that are kind of good. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
see. And it's also just so hard to decide what is the way to move forward after this pandemic. I think the cat's out of the bag. More places are going to have what is called a hybrid working style, where people aren't required in the office 5 days a week. But whether places will say, "Oh, you don't have to be in the office any day a week," that's a totally different thing.
Yeah, I really strongly agree with the distribution of essentially jobs, wealth, and ideas, because you've seen Silicon Valley has been winning for a very, very long time and winning big. And I don't want to say at the expense, but you could say it, quote unquote, in the expense of other parts of the country. For example, the Rust Belt basically was the Silicon Valley 100 years ago, and now you're seeing, cities formerly go bankrupt years ago, Detroit, Dayton, Ohio, and these places are just basically destroyed, essentially, or were destroyed at one point. Now they're sort of getting back to hopefully building electrical vehicles and getting into other markets. But like you said, distributing different offices to places like Atlanta, Miami, um, the Texas Triangle, just different places where you can get new ideas and new talent is crucial. And Silicon Valley is always going to be the mecca. It's not like it's going to ever go away. I don't think a Detroit scenario is really ever, at least not in the near future. But definitely want to distribute the wealth and the ideas across the nation. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. It's yeah. You're very right. You're right.
yeah. Speaking of remote work, do you think that it's gonna stay as a pre-COVID era sort of style of work, or what you alluded to, where it's a mixture of hybrid, and then some companies, or even a lot of companies, saying we're not even gonna have you in the office at all. We're gonna have you working remotely. Some companies, I believe, did that at one point.
Yeah, I think it's gonna go hybrid. So full disclosure, um, when I was at eHarmony, it moved from one part of LA to another part of LA, and over the years, many people left. I stayed because I had negotiated 2 days a week from home. So I went into the office for 3 days, and I said, schmoozed and got to talk to people. And then on those days I worked home, I was at home. I was like working really hard, and that's where I did like most of my coding. I was most effective. And I think it was actually like a perfect model because I got to do both of the things that I needed. In today's world, it's a little hard to judge because this is not just remote working. It's also kind of like the global pandemic and a quarantine. And so it's hard to know exactly how much of how things have gone are due to either parts of that. But in terms of like effectiveness of an individual engineer is probably.
Um, so the question I had for you, Kanan, was you answered my question earlier, but I wanted a quick answer on this one from you. I know you've been in the industry for a while, so you understand tech better than me and Bosa here do. But I wanted your opinion on the bigger innovations coming out, the big hitters coming out with machine learning, blockchain, quantum computer, all that crazy stuff that's about to be coming out soon with the AR, VR, all that stuff that's really trying to come in. How will that affect industry in total? Is my question to you.
um, I think that machine learning is the one that's kind of, it's not the future anymore. It's like the present. Machine learning has come to power a lot of the platforms that we use every day, and it's a skill set that is a lot of people are going to extra schooling to go develop. Although I think there's a lot of uh, kind of experimentation you can do on your own right now once you have kind of normal computer science concepts down. And so I think that's the one that is just such a big it's such a big thing where we talk about it very often at work. It's what powers the recommendations that we show to our users. It's what powers the recommendations that YouTube uses and that Netflix uses, and that how ads are all across the internet are formed. The machine learning of, okay, I have this ad, but who should I show it to? And then I should show it to the person who I think is going to click. And so it's there's like literally predictive click rates. And so I think that's the one that's so much now is, if I was to say there's like a skill that people like should spend some time learning, it's that one, because that's the one that is becoming very, 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 very valuable. And if I'm going to be really honest, we need more people who are from the out groups to be in the room, to be working on these models, to be kind of helping shape them.
And you mean in terms of ethics, and because we know these are machines at the end of the way, their biases are based on the biases of whoever programs them, right?
Yeah.
So you know, we seen it with Twitter. I don't know if you saw the whole thing where they weren't cropping images correctly. They were choosing white faces over black face, and they said it was because of contrast. And that's a thing that black people weren't there just to answer for in an ethics based thing. You know what I mean? So like, and these are questions. I agree with you. I think, you know, hopefully, you know, our brothers and sisters can hopefully get up on there and join in on the programming sector of reality, the tech sector, and they can have their fair share of input when it comes to these discussions.
Yeah, I have a friend he's getting his PhD at Stanford in it, and you know, he's pretty vocal about the ways that we use it. Or there was a whole story. There were there was a AI ethics researcher named Timnit Gebru, who was essentially fired from Google and some others. And her job and others' jobs there at Google was to make sure that the way that Google was using its artificial intelligence, its machine learning, was being done in an equitable way that it wasn't hurting people. And so I think it's definitely something that we need to kind of keep our eyes on. But it is, from a technology standpoint, it's the one where I'm starting to like, I work with some of the teams that I work alongside have a lot of machine learning engineers on them, and so I'm like starting to pick up some of the concepts, and I find it really interesting, and I think that's where a lot of things are going to go. In terms of some of the other ones, I've seen much less for them. I'll speak of the one that I probably know about the most, which is VR. I think VR is interesting, but I think it's less interesting than augmented reality. And so, to give an example, I've used like not Optimus, Oculus,
Oculus here.
Oculus Rift, and it's fun. It's like it's kind of fun. It's totally immersive. It's really useful. But then I used a technology called Microsoft's
HoloLens.
HoloLens, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I was playing a game, and in this game, there were like monsters coming out of the walls, and I was shooting at the monsters, and so it was still a game. But I just saw all of the applications that it could be used as, like you're walking down the street, or like in your car, you can see the different things. And so I think the augmented reality one is one that I just see have like a lot of consumer applications in a way that is a little bit, I think, easier to work into people's lives than virtual reality, because in virtual reality it's virtual and it's encompassing, and so it's hard to integrate into other parts of your life. I think when I think of
The most hype
what's the
one, blockchain.
I'm going to come back to blockchain.
Okay.
When I think of self-driving cars, I've known a few people who've worked at various self-driving car companies, and that one is very interesting because we're clearly making a lot of progress, but we're still probably like 10 years or more away from like true self-driving. And so it's exciting, but it's not quick. And then the last one is blockchain. And so this one I would say, probably more conservative feelings on. Maybe I'm just old. But to me, I look at it, and from a technology standpoint, I'm like, okay, this is kind of interesting, the way the blockchain part of it works. From a store of value perspective, I get Bitcoin or even Ethereum, because like you can theoretically buy something with Bitcoin. So like I understand its value, even though, you know, I don't know how often people are like using Bitcoin to like purchase a cup of coffee, but it's theoretically possible. But when we get into the kind of altcoins and we get into Dogecoin, where like its only value is like ephemeral, or its only value is in like I think
It's a
this is going
meme.
to go up. That's where I personally get scared because I'm just like, you invest in a stock and you're like, okay, I hope AMC goes up, right? Like AMC, whether it does good or bad, like eventually there's like a real number behind it. There's real knowledge. I think movies are coming back. AMC is a good one. But when I think about some of these other ones, it's just speculation that the value of the currency will go up, which I feel a lot more uncomfortable about. That said, I wish I put $1,000 into Bitcoin in 2016 when my friends were talking about it because it would have been worth a whole lot more money. Or my friends 3 weeks ago, oh my gosh, Dogecoin is going to go to 10%, and I'm like, ha ha ha. And I think Dogecoin has, I think it hit 25 cents last week. And so I see people making money on it, and I'm happy for them. Um, but I think I want there to be a little bit more reality based on the value of it. But I've seen blockchain described as like a technology that's looking for a need. Well, in terms of wealth generation, it's certainly generating wealth for people. The trick here is that there will come a point where the people who have the most of it will start selling it and the value will go down. And so people who got in late will be, underwater. So full disclosure, I put some money in GameStop. I woke up and I was up $3,000, and then I told my wife, and then I was up $2,000, and then the next day I was down $1,000. and, and so as of today, I'm down on GameStop because I got in late. And so like this is the game that you kind of don't know exactly when things are going to change. Luckily with GameStop, I only put in as much money that if I lost all of this money, I would be okay with that. Like I kind of understood the reality of the gamble, but I don't know if everyone's being as kind of prudent about that. You see a lot of redditors talking about they're YOLOing their college savings into
Man.
things like that, which is if it works out, then this is great for them. But there's also a big potential of failure. So I guess I'm more of an old school investor like that, where I prefer to be a little bit more diversified and for there to be some sort of uh, reason that things are going up or down. So that's my thoughts on blockchain.
I think your skepticism of Bitcoin and uh, not exactly the technology, but Bitcoin and Dogecoin and all those coins in general is completely valid. They're not really backed by any sort of value. Like there's no gold backing it. There's no product that it's backing. It's simply it's the definition of a fiat currency. I mean, essentially has no value except for the fact that you trust that it's going to go up if more people buy it. However, I do think that, and I don't have a lot of knowledge on Dogecoin or Bitcoin or anything, but what I would assume is that it's a little bit of a hedge against the dollar. So, and we can dive in to this a little bit, but a lot of dollars have been printed, a lot of inflation is occurring, and so people might be trying to look for various ways of diversifying their assets. Unfortunately, one of those areas is in meme stocks now, more specifically in like a thing like Dogecoin, where that was literally started as a joke. I mean, essentially
It was
the engineer
literally a
behind,
joke. That one was literally a joke.
yeah.
Like
So
a lot of the other ones were like in good faith. Like I believe this is a good technology and this is a good way to build our cryptocurrency. And so yeah, I think it's skepticism, and I also have to kind of, how do I put it? It's This is a little different than it's one of those things where it's just like it's okay that other people are like willing to consider this differently than I do, right? Because just like how I've seen things go up and down changes it. Like I remember during in 2008 before the market crash. I remember before the market crash, and I remember like high school friends who had dropped out of college with 3 houses, and I was like, something's wrong here, and and
wow,
I remember like people who were not well informed, who were like making having conversations on it. And that was the thing that worried me, when it was just like not the people who like actually spent some time thinking about it. And so when I think about someone who kind of talks about Dogecoin like that, where like, oh, this is a hedge against something, or they actually have some sort of like real reason behind their thinking, that's something that I'm like much less concerned about than someone who like heard that GameStop is going up, so they bought GameStop, right? Like it's the so. Or right now, if I was to go and put some money in Dogecoin right now, I wouldn't be doing it for any like real reason that I think is defensible. I would just be like, I hope I make some money real quick, and I'm just a lot less comfortable with that. But I mean, if you think about it, like that's kind of the whole stock market. Except it's just historically there's been things behind it, right? But Dogecoin is like bigger than Barclays now. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah, it's a field game right now when it comes to just the entire economic model. I know that you have a little bit of an understanding of how economics and various aspects of the economy sort of work. You do actually have also an understanding of behavioral economics. You want to explain to listeners what behavioral economics is, sort of just get a breakdown of what exactly that entails.
Behavioral economics is a little bit the like it's economics that's not necessarily talking about money. And so I'll describe a few of the favorite books that I've read. One of the favorite books that I've read is called Nudge. I have it here in my bookshelf, and it's about how there's small decisions, small changes in how you present information that will make people choose different things. So, for instance, at a company, if they have a default of increasing someone's contributions to their 401k at 1%, that's the default. Most people are not going to do anything, and eventually they'll be maxed out in their 401k. But if you change the default to nothing, whatever you put in your 401k, that's up to you. Then most people will not increase it, and so it's this sort of idea of I think they call it libertarian paternalism. So a person has the freedom to do whatever they want, but the
I like
default
that.
is that will do the things that's the best for the most people. And so that's one of the books that I enjoy. Or I've read things like what was another one? A lot of the Malcolm Gladwell books, although those aren't quite as good, or Freakonomics, and it's just about like the way that people make decisions, and I find it just really interesting because the way that people behave is that's sort of like the reality of it, and sometimes like true economics tries to boil things down to just what rational people do, but like people are not rational. And so they often make irrational decisions, and you kind of have to recognize those sorts of things. And so um, let me think of some other books that I've enjoyed. Let's see, I have a list of my
I'll put
books.
all this in the show notes. I want all this game going to our listeners because
Where's my book recommendations?
any also graphic novels as well. I know this is completely off topic, but
Oh yeah, that yes, I can do that. Oh, these are all like work related things. But I just find that sort of thing helpful. I read a book once called it was called Peak: The Secrets of New Science of Expertise, and so that one was actually related to a chapter in a Malcolm Gladwell book that talked about the 10,000 hour rule. And so that rule was, in order to be an expert, you need to spend 10,000 hours on something. This wonderful anecdote about how the Beatles spent a lot of time like playing in bars. And one of the things that was interesting about like the actual economist who wrote this book was that 10,000 hours is like arbitrary. But like if you spent a few hundred hours at like, I don't know, ping pong, you might be really good. Or there are some things that take far less than 10,000 hours. Or like if you want to be a world class violinist, it probably takes more than 10,000 hours. But it's really had to do with the concept of something that's called deliberate practice, where it's not just practicing to get better. And so I actually have a fun story about deliberate practice. I moved to the Bay Area, and I didn't want to ride a bike to the park. I wanted to ride a scooter, like a kick scooter, like a razor. And so I did, and I was kicking, and I was getting very tired in my right leg because that was my kicking leg. And so I deliberately practiced to also be able to kick with my left leg, so my right leg wouldn't get so tired. And it was very different than just like practice scooting, it was just like I am going to make sure that I alternate, or like I was doing the type of practice that would allow me to get better. And now I have no trouble. I'm an ambiscooter or whatever. I can scoot equally well with both legs because of the deliberate practice that I put in, that I learned from the concept from reading this book. And one of the things that over my career and over my life that I've learned is like reading books like these, I'm able to apply little lessons from them and actually like get better and become more wise over time. And on the other side, one of the things that I like about graphic novels is it allows you to kind of escape the reality. It's very interesting because I love Marvel. Marvel over DC for me. Make my Marvel, and so I read most of those books. But when I think about the graphic novels that I love, the graphic novels I love are usually from different. They're called indie novels, and so they're much more likely to be just kind of a zany idea. And so here's one. It's called Chew, and it's about a detective, but he tastes things to figure out what the crime was, and so it's kind of gross. Or here's one that I really like, and it's called Avengers Arena. This is a Marvel one, but it's essentially the Hunger Games, but with various teenage characters in the Marvel universe. That one's pretty fun. I have one here called Alex and Ada. This guy's grandmother buys him a robot. He doesn't want that robot, and so now he has to deal with this robot. There's this one I like called Why the Last Man. It's if all the men on Earth die except this one man, and everybody else is women, and it's a mystery of like what happened to the men, and can this guy survive? And there's just a lot of fun stories. And one of the beautiful things that I've learned in this book, actually understanding comics, is that comics is a special medium, because when you read a book, you're able to kind of understand a lot, like what the characters are thinking or like what they're doing. When you see a movie, you can see it beautifully and you can hear it beautifully. But when you have a comic book, there's a few things that you can do in a comic book that you can't do in other places. One is you can draw basically anything, right? Like anything that can be conveyed visually. And so I'm trying to think like it would take a lot of money to like to do this all in CGI,
Right.
but I mean it just takes a few days for a graphic artist. Or here's this beautiful page. This is also one of my favorite artistic teams here. But like they can kind of draw the different dimensions here. And one of the things that's interesting is in addition to the visuals and the speaking parts, you also get what a person is thinking. And so a movie typically doesn't have a voiceover about what the character is thinking or the motivation about what's thinking, or it doesn't describe the history of the arena or whatever that they walk into. And comics is an interesting medium because it's able to convey all of those thoughts at once. And you can read it at your own pace instead of the pace that the movie has it. And so this is one of the reasons that I think comics is a really unique medium for sharing stories. And I think it's really good.
Yeah. Have you ever read Calvin and Hobbes? I
Oh
love
yeah,
that
yeah. I
series
suppose that's how I got
as a
started. My
kid.
kids love it now, and I still do. It's just so imaginative. I love it.
Yeah, that completely changed like my dynamic on just reading and just life in general. Because this is a series I was reading from the age I think of what first grade all the way up until I was in middle school, and it was like I loved it. Every single one I bought, almost all of them. I have them in my back office where my dad is, but yeah, I loved it. So
Yeah, Calvin and Hobbes is a really, really, really good one. If you need recommendations, I should put my recommendations. But yeah, that's the beauty of it, right? Like Calvin and Hobbes is mostly funny, right? And then I have ones that are more sci-fi. I have a handful of horror. I have a handful of things that are kind of like historical. I actually read one called March by the late Congressman John Lewis. And to be completely honest, like I don't think I really understood the civil rights movement until I read that book. I thought the bus boycott was like a week or two, and it was much longer than that. Or I read They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, which is about the Japanese internment camps. And so even concepts like history can be conveyed through the medium of comics, and I think it's really wonderful.
yeah, no, definitely. It has been a journey And I didn't want to end off with anything loose, so I really wanted to end off with a bang. So before you go, I actually wanted to ask you if you can just give 1 to 3 pieces of advice, and we're gonna switch it up. This is a little bit of a tradition. We did it in the first episode, and I'm gonna keep it going. But 1 to 3 pieces of advice you would give to future NSBE at UCR graduates, but specifically CS majors. So not specific software engineering, but just CS majors.
I think the specifics would be apply everywhere, even if you don't think it's interesting. And the reason is that you might find things interesting that you didn't expect. I spent a lot of time in Pinterest on ads, and I did not expect to find ads interesting, but I thought it was really compelling, and I was actually like part of making the business at the company. And so I think it's very important to like don't hold yourself back. You might be like you, at least have the conversations and then decide whether you like it or not. So that's one bit of advice. The second bit of advice is that you need to be really freaking good.
Straight
So
up.
what I mean by that is like the talent will kind of carry you along. Be really freaking good. And the last part that I would say is kind of like I don't think advocate for yourself is the right word, but I would say that you kind of need to take control. And so what I mean by that is it's your career, it's your college career, and it will be your future kind of working career. And so in the same way that you don't just take whatever classes they have, but you decide the specific classes that you want to take that are interesting to you in the CS major. You should do the same in your career. And so, if you are interested in machine learning, well, go learn machine learning. Or if I think about myself, I wanted to make more money, and so I went and found out the skills that were being that needed at these places that were paying more. Learned those skills, eventually was able to get a job on the strength of those skills that I already had. I think about times when I wasn't happy with what I was being paid, so I actually like grabbed the wheel, got the offer, got that raise. I think about the time when I said, "Hey, I want to be a manager," and in my past, I would just ask, "Hey, I want to be a manager," and then I wouldn't say anything. And this time, I like followed up week after week after week, and they let me know the skills that I needed to learn. So that I learned those skills, and then I was able to do the job. But either way, it's not being passive about your career and letting things happen to you, but grabbing the wheel and taking control of where you want to go as you have open eyes and you're open to do different things and you learn, oh, it turns out data science is really interesting for me. Turns out product management is really interesting. Maybe I want to go down deeper into the code or up into the front end. Maybe I want to do all the things and to remain full stack. But being open, grabbing the wheel to go the direction that you want to go, and then whatever that direction is, be really freaking good at it, so that you can become a manager and basically hire some more black people.
I love
So that's I think how it should work.
That boss energy there.
it.
I mean,
Absolutely.
like it's actually kind of interesting because I would never hire someone just because they were black, right? Like
Mhm.
I don't I need a qualified candidates for my team. But what it is I never know how other managers are approaching things or if they even notice what the demographics of their team are. And so it's actually nice that I can like actually pay attention to it. And it can be a something that I'm making sure that I'm always interviewing candidates from underrepresented backgrounds alongside of all the other candidates to make sure that I'm finding qualified candidates who are great for the role.
And then that's the important thing though, isn't it? Like equal opportunity, not equal income, because the whole point is that it's to have equal opportunity to jobs. You don't necessarily need want to promise anyone in the end game or anything, but the whole point of it is make sure everybody has the opportunity to at least get their foot through the door, and from there you go on see if they deserve it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Well, thank you so much, Kanan. We loved you on the podcast. The second episode was amazing, and I know our listeners got a lot of game and so many topics. So thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to be here. So,
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you again, Ken. Have a
All
good
right,
one.
bye, y'all.
all right, peace.
Peace.
Yeah, you heard what I said. And what's that? If I say that I'm gon' ride, man, I'm gon' ride. If I say that we gon' slide, man, we gon' slide. Your day one, I'ma be right by your side. To my body in the ground, on my soul up in the sky. If I say that I'm gon' ride, man, I'm gon' ride. If I say that we gon' slide, man, we gon' slide. Your day one, I'ma be right by your side. To my body in the ground, on my soul up in the sky. I'm gon' ride. And we gon' slide. I'm gon' ride. And we gon' slide.